I'm Hannah. I've spent most of my life feeling like a shadow in the family I was born into. Maybe that's dramatic, but it's the truth. Growing up in a small suburban town in Ohio, I was always the quiet one, the one who kept her head down. My younger brother, Zach, was the golden child, the one who could walk into a room and light it up with his energy, the one who could charm anyone into doing anything. And then there was me, the one who always seemed to blend into the background. Too shy, too reserved, too much of a wallflower. It wasn't that I didn't try. I had dreams. I had ambitions, but they always felt like they didn't matter as much as Zach's. He was the one who had my father's approval, always the one getting praised for his accomplishments. "Why can't you be more like Zach?" My father would ask this constantly, his voice a mix of disappointment and frustration. And no matter how much I tried to excel in my own right, it was never enough. I could never be the person he wanted me to be, the person he seemed to see in Zach. I didn't get the same opportunities Zach had. He went off to an Ivy League school, graduating with honors and landing a high-paying job in finance. I didn't have the connections or the resources to follow the same path, so I did what I could. I worked my way through community college, paying for every semester with the little money I earned waitressing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And eventually, I landed a job in real estate. It wasn't the most exciting career, but it was a stable one. Something I could rely on. I worked hard to get there, but every time I told my father about a new sale or a promotion, I saw that flicker of disinterest in his eyes, that same comparison to Zach's big bonuses or career advancements. Sometimes, I'd look around and wonder if anyone in my family ever noticed the effort I was putting in. I could practically hear the clock ticking in my head as I watched Zach climb higher and higher while I stayed in the same place, always trying to catch up but never quite getting there. Even now, sitting here in the living room of my childhood home, everything feels the same. The couch is worn, the wallpaper peeling, but the weight of my father's expectations still hangs heavy in the air. Zach's absence is like a presence in the room. He's been living in New York for years, and although I see him on holidays, it's as if he's always a little bit of a stranger now, a successful stranger. I haven't seen him in person since last Christmas, but I can still hear his voice, as if he's just outside the door. "I'm proud of you, Hannah," he'd say, his tone sincere but always a little patronizing. It was like he felt sorry for me, like he was the one who had it all figured out. But what about me? What about the life I built, the small victories I fought for? No one ever seems to notice, no one ever asks. It's as if I'm still invisible to them, a background player in their lives. I wonder if it's always going to be like this. I wonder if I'll ever be seen for who I am, not just as the quieter, less successful sibling. And as I stare at the family pictures lining the mantel, Zach's smiling in all of them, I can't help but wonder how long I'll keep trying to prove myself. Will I ever be enough? Or am I destined to always be the afterthought? Is it worth it, fighting for recognition when it feels like it will never come? Or should I stop caring altogether? The family betrayal. A will written without me. It was the summer of 2022 when everything changed. Zach was getting married, and as usual, all the attention was on him. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, a day of joy. But looking back now, I should have seen the cracks forming long before the wedding. The signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs, but I never thought they'd lead to such a devastating conclusion. I'd always thought I was close to Zach, at least I tried to be. But as his wedding day approached, something felt off. It wasn't just the usual feeling of being overshadowed by him. It was something deeper, more personal. I had been helping him with the wedding preparations, picking up the slack where I could, handling the logistics for the venue, running errands, all while working full-time. It was the least I could do for my only brother, right? But the more I tried to get involved, the more I was pushed away. I was told I was too busy, that I had too much on my plate to worry about the finer details. "Don't worry about it, Hannah. We've got everything under control," Zach would say, and I let it go. After all, it was his big day. But as the guest list came together, I was left off the list for the bridal party. No bridesmaid duties, no special role. It wasn't a huge deal at first, but then I found out I wasn't even considered for the family VIP section during the ceremony. I was given a seat in the back, with the other distant relatives, a position that felt more like an afterthought than an inclusion. It hurt more than I cared to admit, but I pushed those feelings down, telling myself that it was Zach's day and that I should be happy for him. The wedding was extravagant, $100,000 for the venue alone, an open bar with top-shelf liquor, and a lavish spread for over 300 guests. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a spectacle, one that felt like it had been planned and executed with precision, as if every detail had been designed to impress, to flaunt wealth. Zach had always been the popular one, the one who could command attention without trying. The guests were all high society business connections and a few friends from college. But then came the moment that shattered me completely. The reception was in full swing, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. I was sitting at a table near the back, my glass of wine untouched, as I watched Zach and his new wife, Emily, dance in the center of the room, their smiles radiant. It wasn't long before the speeches began. I knew they'd asked someone from the family to speak, so I half expected Zach to call on me at some point. After all, I'd been a part of his life for as long as I could remember, but that wasn't the case. The first to speak was Emily's father. His speech was a mixture of humor and pride, but when he finished, I couldn't help but notice the way Zach turned to his best man, someone I had never even met, and gave him the mic. "Now let's hear from my brother," Zach said, gesturing to another man, someone I'd never heard of. This man wasn't family, he wasn't even a close friend, but somehow he was the one Zach had chosen to speak instead of me. I sat there frozen, feeling like the world around me had gone silent. It was like a punch to the gut. In that moment, I realized I had never truly been a part of his world, never truly mattered to him in the way I thought I did. The night continued, and the feeling of exclusion weighed heavily on me. I watched from the sidelines, detached from the joy everyone else was experiencing, as if I were a ghost in my own family's celebration. When it was time to exchange gifts, Emily and Zach received numerous expensive presents, designer watches, honeymoon trips, even a brand new car. But when it came time for the family's gift to Zach, I wasn't asked to contribute. I wasn't even included in the conversation. The final straw came when Zach gave his thank you speech. He thanked everyone for coming, for their love, for their support. But when it came to me, his sister, he said only, "I'm glad to have you here, Hannah." That was it. Those 6 words were all I got. And then later that night, when the guests were all leaving, Emily cornered me in the hallway. She was holding a glass of champagne in one hand, her other hand resting lightly on my arm as she smiled with an almost patronizing kindness. "Hannah, I'm so glad you could make it. I know you must be busy, but Zach and I thought it might be nice to include you in a little surprise." Her smile widened, but there was something about it that felt too rehearsed. She handed me a small envelope. I opened it. Inside was a check for $5,000, made out to me. The note inside was even worse. "Thanks for helping out with the wedding planning. Enjoy the gift." I couldn't believe it. It was as though they were paying me off, compensating me for the work I'd done behind the scenes, as if I were nothing more than an unpaid wedding planner. The insult cut deep, deeper than anything else that day. I didn't want the money. I didn't want their pity. I turned to Emily, forcing a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't need this," I said, but the words came out hollow. "Oh, don't be silly," she said, dismissing me with a wave. "We thought it was a nice gesture. Enjoy." I left that night feeling more alone than ever. I wasn't just excluded from the wedding, I was excluded from their lives. From the beginning, I was nothing more than a secondary character, an afterthought. And the worst part, I didn't even realize it until it was too late. That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much I had given, how much I had tried to be a part of something that never really included me my entire life. I had been second place to Zach, never good enough, never enough to truly be seen. And as the night drew to a close, I knew I had to face a truth that hurt more than any exclusion could. I had been invisible all along. Reactions and emotions, silent anger and pain. I don't think I even cried when I first read the will. Maybe I was too numb to even comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. I remember staring at that letter for what felt like hours, not knowing how to process the words on the page. The letter was cold, clinical, and detached, nothing like the emotional bond I had imagined existed between a father and his daughter. There was no apology, no explanation, just the stark, impersonal truth. Zach is the sole beneficiary. I didn't even need to read the rest of it. The house, the savings, the car collection, everything gone. Nothing for me. I was invisible once again. My hands were shaking, but I didn't cry, I didn't scream. Instead, I felt this cold, seething anger bubbling up from deep inside me. How could he do this? How could my own father, the man who had relied on me in his last years when Zach was too busy building his empire to visit, cut me out like this? I had been the one who helped him with doctor's appointments, who took care of his finances when he couldn't. And now, I was nothing. The first thought that crossed my mind was to call Zach. But then I remembered his dismissive attitude during the wedding. The way he had barely acknowledged me, like I was just another guest at the event. When I needed him, he wasn't there, and now he wouldn't even care that I had been cut out of the will. I tried to call him anyway, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I called my lawyer, hoping against hope that there was some mistake, some way to fight this injustice. My lawyer, a calm and methodical man, told me the cold, hard truth. There was nothing I could do. The will was legal, it was airtight, my father had made sure of it. I had no recourse. I was powerless. I felt a wave of bitterness wash over me, as though the ground beneath me had been pulled out from under my feet. How could they do this to me? And what about Zach? He didn't even call to check on me to apologize for what had happened. It was as if he was gloating over his victory, savoring the fact that he had won and I had lost. I could almost hear his voice in my head, smug and self-assured, saying, "It's always been this way, hasn't it, Hannah? You've always been in the background." The anger boiled over, but it was quickly replaced by something far worse, sadness. I realized in that moment that I had never really been a part of this family. My entire life had been spent trying to earn a place in it, trying to prove my worth, but all I had done was chase after a ghost. My father had never truly seen me, and neither had Zach. In their eyes, I was just the quiet, inconsequential daughter, the one who was always left behind. I thought back to all the times I had been overlooked, all the moments I had worked hard to be seen. I remembered how, when I was a teenager, I had spent weeks helping my father fix up the old house, painting the rooms and cleaning the gutters. I had worked so hard, hoping for one word of praise, one acknowledgement that I was doing something worthwhile. But my father never seemed to notice. He would sit in his chair, absorbed in his newspaper, while I worked in silence. And when I did ask for recognition, when I did hope for some sign that he cared, all I received were the same words. "Why can't you be more like Zach?" That comparison, always being told I wasn't good enough, had been like a weight around my neck. Zach was the one who excelled, who got the praise, the accolades, and I was the one who had to settle for being the invisible one, the one who wasn't worthy of notice. Even when I managed to build my own life, working my way through community college, landing a job in real estate, it was always measured against Zach's success. He had the perfect life, the perfect job, the perfect marriage. I was just there. As I sat in my childhood home, holding that letter in my hands, the walls around me seemed to close in. The house, which had once been full of memories, now felt like a tomb. My tomb, a place where I had buried all the dreams I had once held, only to have them crushed under the weight of my father's favoritism. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't live in a place that reminded me of how little I mattered. I packed my things in a haze, not knowing what I was doing, just moving on autopilot. I couldn't stay in Ohio any longer. It felt like the whole city, the whole world had conspired to make me feel small. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to leave. For the first time, I needed to be somewhere else. Somewhere I could find a sliver of peace, even if it meant being alone. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call Zach. I didn't want to hear his excuses or his cold indifference. I didn't want to hear that I should just get over it, that it was just money, or worse, that I should be grateful for the little that was left to me. I didn't need their pity or their fake apologies. I needed to reclaim my own sense of dignity, my own life. As I packed my suitcase, I thought back to all the times I had sacrificed my own happiness for the sake of family. The times I had put my dreams on hold, the times I had smiled through the pain just to keep the peace. But no more. I was done with being the quiet one, the overlooked one. I was done with being second place. If they wanted to erase me, if they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, then I would let them. But I wouldn't let it break me anymore. I was going to start fresh, even if it meant leaving behind everything I had known. I had no idea what the future held, but it had to be better than the life I had been living in the shadows. As I walked out the door, the weight of my decision settled on me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Terrified, but free. The twist, a mysterious lawyer. 6 months had passed since I left Ohio, 6 months of silence, grief, and self-reflection. The apartment in Chicago, small but cozy, was slowly starting to feel like home. I was rebuilding my life piece by piece, starting with finding a job that allowed me to finally work for myself, away from the shadow of my past. The pain of being excluded from my father's will had faded into the background, a dull ache that came and went like an old wound. But one day, everything changed. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I got the knock on my door. At first, I thought it might be a delivery or a neighbor needing something, but when I opened the door, I found a man standing there. Dressed in a dark, tailored suit, he was holding a thick manila envelope, his face unreadable but professional. "Ms. Bennett," he asked, his voice smooth and authoritative. I nodded cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, introducing himself with a slight nod. "I'm an attorney representing the estate of your late father." My heart skipped. I hadn't expected any communication regarding my father's estate. After everything that had happened, I thought that chapter was closed forever. I stared at him, waiting for him to speak again. "I know this is unexpected," Mr. Caldwell continued, his tone still formal but with a hint of something else, perhaps a touch of empathy. "But it seems your father made some last-minute adjustments to his will that were not recorded by the original lawyer. He paused for a moment, seemingly allowing the weight of his words to settle. You've been included after all. Included? The words barely registered in my mind. I felt a rush of disbelief followed by confusion. Was this some kind of mistake? Was he saying what I thought he was saying? I had to hold onto the door frame for support, unsure of whether I was about to collapse or break into tears. Mr. Caldwell stepped inside as I stood frozen, still processing his words. Your father, he continued, opening the thick file he had brought with him, made a secret codicil to his will just a week before his death. In it, he named you as the recipient of half of his savings, $100,000, and his car collection. I felt the room spin. $100,000 and his car collection, the same collection I had once admired when I was a little girl, the same cars that Zach had always been the one to inherit in our family conversations. I swallowed hard, trying to catch my breath. My thoughts raced, but I couldn't make sense of it. Was this real? Could this be true? Mr. Caldwell's voice brought me back to the present. The estate, including the savings, the house, and the collection, is worth much more than you likely anticipated. After the codicil was added, your father's estate now totals well over $1.2 million. Your brother, Zach, was not the sole beneficiary after all. For a moment, I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. The air in my chest was suddenly gone, and I found myself gasping for breath. The numbness I had felt all those months ago, when I first read the will, was replaced by an overwhelming tidal wave of emotions. Anger, shock, disbelief, and yes, relief. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice trembling. Why would he do this? Why would he leave it this way? Mr. Caldwell's gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Your father had his reasons, he said quietly. But he wanted you to know that he acknowledged your efforts, your sacrifices. He didn't want you to be left behind, as he had thought you were. I shook my head. The entire situation felt surreal. My father had always been so distant, so focused on Zach, and now, in his final moments, he had tried to make amends in a way that I had never expected. I'm still trying to process all of this, I said, my words coming out in a rush. Mr. Caldwell nodded. Take your time, Miss Bennett. I'm here to help with the legal aspects of this transition. There's more paperwork, of course, but I wanted you to have the initial information right away. As I signed the papers he handed me, my mind was still spinning. I had so many questions. Why had my father waited until the very end of his life to make this change? Why had he never told me about it, never mentioned it to anyone? Had he been trying to spare me the hurt of seeing the will, or was this his way of finally seeing me for who I truly was? The next few days were a blur. I contacted the bank to inquire about my father's savings, and I was stunned to learn that the amount Mr. Caldwell had mentioned was accurate. The car collection, a priceless assortment of vintage cars that had been stored in the garage for decades, was also mine now. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what these things represented, a validation of my worth, a sign that I had been seen even if it was too late. But there was still one thing I couldn't understand. Why had Zach not reached out? He had known about the changes to the will, I was certain of that. And yet, not a word. I'd expected some sort of confrontation, or at the very least an explanation, but nothing. I knew then that I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let him walk away unscathed from all of this. A week later, I found myself at a family dinner, arranged by my mother, who insisted we all get together. Zach was there, his usual cocky smile plastered on his face as he joked with everyone around him. I could feel the tension in the room, like there was something unspoken between us, something I was determined to confront. It wasn't long before I could no longer hold it in. Zach, I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, we need to talk. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. What about? He asked, feigning indifference. I'm not playing games anymore. You knew about the will. You knew about the changes. My voice was sharp now, and I could see the others in the room start to shift uncomfortably. You didn't even bother to contact me. Why? Zach's face tightened, and for the first time, he didn't have an immediate response. His usual confidence faltered for a moment, and I could see the crack in his armor. You're just going to throw it in my face, huh? Zach said, his tone defensive. It wasn't my fault. I didn't ask for any of this. I shook my head. You didn't ask for it, but you sure as hell didn't try to stop it either, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me. You couldn't have at least said something, anything. The silence in the room was thick with tension. My mother sat there, her eyes wide, not knowing how to react. Then, in the middle of the tense silence, something unexpected happened. My 9-year-old son, Charlie, who had been quietly sitting at the table coloring, suddenly stood up. I think it's not fair, he said, his small voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to look at him. I looked at Charlie, stunned by his bravery. Charlie, what do you mean? He looked straight at Zach and said, "You're mean to Mommy, you're not nice to her, and now you're taking her stuff. You don't even say sorry." The room fell completely silent. My mother's mouth hung open in shock, and even Zach seemed momentarily stunned by Charlie's words. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a look of shame I had never seen before. Charlie's honesty, so pure and unfiltered, had forced the entire room to confront the truth. Zach had always gotten away with things because of his charm, but now, in front of everyone, he couldn't hide anymore. The truth was out, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one who saw it. Confrontation and establishing boundaries. When I confronted Zach about it, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. His usual confident demeanor faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "Dad never mentioned anything about that," he said, his voice defensive, as if trying to cover his tracks. I let out a deep, controlled breath before I replied, my voice colder than I had ever intended. "I'm sure he didn't," I said flatly, staring him down, "but I'm done being ignored, Zach. You had your time. Now it's mine." His face tightened, a look of disbelief crossing his features as he tried to process my words. "What are you talking about?" he asked, almost scoffing. "You're just going to walk away from this. You're going to turn your back on everything we've been through." I could feel the old patterns trying to resurface, the ones where I would back down, apologize, and let him take control of the conversation. But this time there was no room for that. No more excuses. No more bending. I was done. "I'm not interested in the money anymore," I said firmly, the weight of my decision hanging in the air. "It's not about the inheritance, Zach. It never was. It's about respect, about finally being seen for who I am. I've spent my entire life playing this role, the quiet one, the invisible one, and I'm done with it." His jaw tightened, and I saw a flicker of anger flash in his eyes. But it wasn't the anger of someone who was used to getting his way. It was the kind of anger that came from being caught off guard, from being forced to face something that was outside his control. "You think you can just walk in here and demand respect after everything that's happened?" he snapped, the words coming out harsher than he intended. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked him dead in the eye, letting my silence speak louder than any words could. "I'm not asking for your approval anymore," I said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything from you. I'm done fighting for a place in this family that I should have always had. And I'm not going to keep bending over backward hoping for your validation. It's over." He stood there, frozen, as if he couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what I was saying. For years, he had been the center of attention, the one who could do no wrong. But now, the tables had turned. He wasn't the one with the power anymore. I was. "I've been taking care of everyone for so long," I continued, my voice growing steadier with each word. "I've given my time, my energy, my love, and you've never once appreciated it. You've never once considered me more than a shadow in your life, but not anymore. I have my own life now, my own dreams, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel small anymore." The words hung in the air between us, and for the first time I saw something in Zach's eyes, something close to regret. But it was too late. The years of neglect, of being cast aside, had built up into a wall that couldn't be broken down with a few words of remorse. I could see the shift in the room, too. My mother, who had been sitting quietly at the table, now looked up from her hands. She hadn't said a word throughout this exchange, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Fear of losing the family she had tried so hard to hold together. She had always played the role of peacekeeper, never wanting to rock the boat. But now, the boat was capsizing, and I wasn't going to be the one to hold it together anymore. "Zach, I don't expect you to understand," I said softly, my gaze now shifting to my mother. "But this is about boundaries. I've spent so many years suppressing myself, taking on the role of the caretaker, the good daughter. But no more. I'm setting a boundary that I won't cross. And if you can't respect it, then I'm done." Zach looked at me, the anger in his eyes slowly turning to confusion. He couldn't grasp what was happening, and that, in a way, was the most freeing part of it. I wasn't trying to explain myself anymore. I wasn't looking for his approval. I was standing my ground, and he could either accept it or leave it. For a long moment, there was only silence. My mother's eyes flicked between us, unsure of how to react. She had always tried to keep the peace, but now, with everything out in the open, I saw the truth in her gaze, a quiet admission that she had always known this day would come. "I've always known you were stronger than you let on," she said quietly, breaking the silence at last. "But I never knew you could stand up to him like this." I looked at her, my heart heavy but resolute. "I've been standing up for everyone else my whole life, Mom. It's time I stood up for myself. Zach opened his mouth as if to protest, but the words died in his throat. He couldn't argue with that. And for the first time, he didn't try to make it about him. Instead, he turned and walked away from the conversation, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. But I didn't mind. I had made my point, I had established my boundaries, and no matter what came next, I wasn't going to let anyone cross them. As I sat there, the weight of what I had done began to sink in. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't the person I had been before. I wasn't the person who had stood quietly in the shadows, always giving and never receiving. Now I was someone new. Someone who had learned the power of saying no, and though I didn't know what would come next, whether Zach would try to win me back, whether my mother would finally see the truth, it didn't matter. I had taken control of my own life, and that was the only thing that mattered now. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles to fight, more pain to endure, but in that moment I felt a sense of peace, because for the first time, I had chosen myself. And that in itself was worth everything. Open ending and message. As I sit here now, in my small but cozy apartment, I realize something. The money, it doesn't matter. The car collection, I sold it, donated half to charity. The $100,000, it's already been spent, invested in a new project I'm passionate about. What matters now is that I'm free. I've created a life for myself, one that doesn't rely on anyone's approval. It's funny how freedom works, how it sneaks up on you when you least expect it. For so long, I had been a prisoner of other people's expectations, especially my family's. I had spent years trying to prove my worth, bending myself into shapes I wasn't meant to fit just to be seen. But now, in this quiet space I've carved for myself, I realize that I don't need anyone's validation anymore. Not from Zach, not from my mother, and certainly not from my father, who I thought had been the one to define me. But as I look at the city skyline from my window, I can't help but wonder, what is the price of self-worth? How much of it are we willing to sacrifice to be loved, to be accepted? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you fight for what was taken, or would you walk away? I used to think that self-worth was something you could only find by being approved by others, that the value of who you were came from how much others saw you, how much they needed you. But I've learned that the true measure of self-worth comes from within. It's not something that can be handed to you, nor is it something you can ever earn by doing for others. It's about knowing who you are and being comfortable enough in your own skin to stop seeking permission to be yourself. My family, they might never fully understand the decisions I've made. They might never see me as the person I've become, and that's okay. I've realized that it's not my job to make them see me, to fight for their approval. I used to think that if I could just be the person they wanted me to be, everything would fall into place. But what I've learned is that when you try to live for someone else's definition of who you should be, you lose sight of your own. There is a freedom that comes with setting boundaries, with saying no when something doesn't serve you, with stepping away from people or situations that diminish your sense of self. But there's also a deep sadness in it, because sometimes it feels like you're walking away from love, from family, from history, and that can hurt more than anything. But in that pain, I've found strength. In choosing myself, in walking away from a life that wasn't truly mine, I've reclaimed the most important thing I could ever have, my peace. I suppose, in the end, it's not about the inheritance. It's not about the money, the material things, or the titles. It's about who we choose to be, no matter how others see us. It's about owning your truth, even when it means leaving people behind. And that's a question I still ask myself every day. How much of yourself are you willing to give up for the sake of family, of approval, of love? How much of your soul are you willing to trade just to feel accepted, to feel seen? Maybe we all have to make that choice at some point. Maybe some of us make it earlier than others, but I'm not afraid to ask myself that question anymore. I know now that I can stand on my own, even if no one else ever stands with me. I want to leave you with something to think about. What would you do if you found yourself in a similar situation? Would you fight to reclaim what was taken from you, or would you walk away and build something new? Where do you draw the line between family loyalty and your own self-worth? The answer may be different for everyone, but what I've learned is this: no one should ever have to sacrifice themselves to be loved. Not by their family, not by anyone, because the most important love of all is the one you give to yourself.